Welcome to an enlightening podcast from islampodcasts.com. We encourage our listeners to please comment and let us know how we can grow in our knowledge to better serve our community. Please remind your family and friends to also visit islampodcasts.com for engaging discussions on current events, Islamic guidance, Quran, tafsir, seerah, and much more.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brothers and sisters. And Jazakallah khair for joining us for the weekly online Friday circles arranged by members of Hizb ut-Tahrir. Hizb ut-Tahrir is the only Islamic political party that works tirelessly day and night to establish the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth by establishing the Khilafah. Brothers and sisters, before we start, can I please request you to share the Facebook and YouTube page with your friends and families? The more can join, the more will benefit bi'idhnillah. So brothers and sisters, as you may be aware of the recent situation that's been taking place in the USA, the land who gives examples of how great their history is, of how great their country is, of how well organized their ruling system is. The country who invaded their own ruling system onto others' land, to impose their system onto other lands, and how it showed the world that how it gives justice. But really, if we compare all that to what's been happening in the last few days, few weeks between Biden and Trump, is that what we see? Is that what we really see, the justice of that land? And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. When they are told, do not spread corruption in the land, they reply, we are only peacemakers. So brothers and sisters, today's topic is democracy exposed. And I will invite my brother Muzammil, who will discuss this topic. And after that, we will have an opportunity for any question and answers you may have. So please stay tuned with us. And before I pass it over to Brother Muzammil, can I please remind you again to share the Facebook and YouTube page with your friends and families. Jazakallah khair. Brother Muzammil, over to you, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Now, the angle I would like to take this, I mean, it's a fairly new topic now, so the time to prepare for this week actually been quite short. Now, the point of view I would like to kind of make from this, the whole situation is this, is that for the last kind of 200 years, I mean, maybe even slightly more than that, the West has kind of been the role model. It's put itself forward as the role model for the rest of the world to follow. And we see that, and what we see, and to be honest, that is the reality at the moment, that every single kind of elite from any of our nations, they look towards the West on how to govern. They look towards the West on even from the politics all the way through to the administration, through technology, to everything, in every sphere, they look towards the West. And the West kind of give one kind of formula for governance, which is they say, right, states need to be secular. What they mean by secular is that they need to make sure that religion, or any religion, has absolutely no kind of impact or no influence on governance. Obviously, when we see states like India and these things, that formula, the West kind of turn a blind eye to the kind of influence of Hindu right wing kind of on that. But for the Muslims, their kind of dictate is, and their ethos is that no, you have to be secular. The other kind of formula that the kind of a factor they give or variable they give is that they have to be liberal. What they mean by liberal is that a state should emphasize and it should kind of make the most important aspect of that state, or the personal freedoms of individuals. So the individual freedom is championed over any other kind of idea, and the individual freedom is championed over kind of the right of the state and the right of the collective. Now we'll see the opposite to that is totalitarianism and Stalinism and these kind of fascism and these kind of ideologies where the collective is emphasized over the state. But the West, in general, they say, right, no, you have to be liberal. So as a society, you have to accept homosexuality. You have to accept kind of, well, any personal freedom anybody desires to do, really. Whether it's that insult, whether that is to insult Rasulullah or any other kind of personal kind of expression that people have. The second thing is, and sorry, the third and last thing is, and they say, right, a state to be successful has to be capitalist. What they mean by capitalist is that a state it has to emphasize the market economy. Things in that state, the economy of that state should be a market economy. It should not be a command economy like the socialist states. So these are basically the three kind of the formula they give: that secular, liberal, and capitalist. Now, what they say that these three things provide a nation is that they say that it provides governance. It provides stable governance. And what they mean by stable governance is that the state is not a failed state. And a failed state is basically a state where the transition of power from one administration to the next administration is not via constitutional means. Now you will see this in many of our nations where power is transferred from one state, one administration to the next administration, either via a coup or via some kind of revolution, some kind of uprising. Now that is what you call a failed state. That the constitutional means of transferring power haven't actually worked, and power has been transferred from one administration to the next administration in a haphazard or non-constitutional means. Now, the other thing that they say is that this formula provides is what we call accountable governance. And accountable governance is that your rulers are accountable to the people that the governors are accountable to the governed. And in that way, what they say is that, or what they propose is that the interests of the state of the people as a whole are taken into account. These are paramount. It's not the interest of one part of society, rather the interest of the whole of society. But we'll see that isn't really the case. Second thing is that the third thing is that with this formula, states are progressive. They find new and better ways of living. The old traditions, which they say suffocate society, these are done away with, and a better kind of way of living is a more progressive, a progressive, modern way of living kind of ensues. And fourth thing that they said that they claim that this kind of formula it achieves is a technologically advanced society. That society become technologically advanced by this formula. Now, really, that these are just suppositions. They are not actually. It isn't actually the reality. Maybe the reality for the West, but there is one proviso in all of this, and that is that this is true as long as somebody else is paying the bills. Now, really, the stability of the West in the last 50 years and beyond, actually, maybe for the last 100 years, has been bought by instability in the rest of the world. Because to keep these nations stable, to keep a decent amount of income coming down, that was called that cascade, or is that a huge amount of money had to enter the top. So really, the rest of the world has paid their bills, and really these people do have that mentality that they say, right. I mean, Tony Blair kind of spelled it out where he said that in the civilized world we use the world of civilization, and what he meant by the civilized world is the US, Europe, Russia, and that is what they call the civilized world. But with the rest of the world, it's a jungle, and you use the laws of the jungle. So when we look at liberal democracies, liberal secular capitalist democracies, really they have been an absolute disaster for the rest of the world, and we'll talk about themselves in a bit. In that to keep their society stable and to keep a decent amount of income for their people, the rest of they have instilled the most brutal and nasty dictators in the rest of the world. And these brutal nasty dictators are like your typical, high street junkies. They will sell something worth trillions and billions for pennies. And just like that junkie will steal a TV worth £500 and sell it for £10 just to get that hit. And this is what they've really done with the rest of the world. That people, that other nations have given their mineral resources and other resources and their markets away to the West for just a few $1 million. They've given billions of dollars worth of assets for a few $1 million in the pocket of the elite. Now, what else have we had? What else have the West shown us? They've shown us right. They have shown us 2 world wars, and these 2 world wars, we have over 100. We have had near enough 100 million dead. Now, this is directly the fruits of secular liberal capitalism, especially capitalism, where the competition between states it comes to a point where war breaks out, and that war, because the nation has spread out, because these nations are in control of the rest of the world, that war spread out to the rest of the world. Now, we haven't had a 3rd World War, and really the reason why we haven't had a 3rd World War is what we call the concept of mutually assured destruction. That the West have realized, they've realized that, okay, if we have another war, we are going to destroy ourselves and everybody else, so we best kind of sit down. And they put various kind of mechanisms in place, like the EU and these kind of things, that try to prevent this almost inevitable 3rd World War. Now, these are, like I say, what we would call the fruit of democracy for the rest of the world. Now, for the West itself, now we could talk about a lot of the social ills of these countries, and these are actually quite obvious. So there are a huge number of social ills in these countries. For extremely wealthy countries, we have an awful lot of homeless people, and when we see the issue with COVID, the huge number, the dead and dying in these countries outnumber the mortality in the 3rd world by a huge amount. Mainly because the elderly are on their own; they have to fend for themselves. So even a small fall or even a small illness, they get dehydrated, end up in hospital, end up with COVID, and that's it. That's the end of it. Now, but we'll talk about the issue. Now, Trump came to power in America 4 years ago, but there are a couple of things that brought him to power, and these are what you would call the inevitable results of secular liberal democracy. And the first thing that brought him to power is automation. And the second thing is globalization. Now, really, these 2 things, automation and globalization, what they have done is that they have impoverished a huge number of people. Now, the middle class in America, not just America, even in Britain, Europe, and most of the developed world is in free fall. The next generation of middle class children they will not be able to afford houses. They will not be able to afford a house for themselves. They will not have decent incomes, and people have realised that this is the case. And Trump, as all kind of populist leaders, they promise to kind of reverse this, but really these 2 factors are actually within the interests of the elite of Western societies. It is in the interest of the elite that they automate their production, they do away with human labor, and they produce products much cheaper at a cheaper rate, so they can sell, so they can increase their profit. Now, and the other thing is globalization. Initially, the US thought that because we are, as I say, secular, liberal, and capitalist, and democratic, we have an edge over the rest of the world. And the rest of the world will never ever kind of develop because they are not these things. Because technological progression, it depends upon these on these factors. But obviously that isn't the case, is it? Now, when we look at the rise of China, China has become a technologically advanced state, and neither is secular. So neither is it liberal. It's atheist. Sorry, so if it ticks the secular box, it's not liberal. It's not democratic, and it's not capitalist at all. But it's managed to progress. It's managed to become a technologically advanced nation. It's managed to become an industrialized nation, and it's managed to become a competition for the West. So now, as you see, before when we were young, when we had a full head of hair, that most of the items that we bought were manufactured in the West. But now, most of the items that we buy are actually manufactured in the East. Now that has been a big shock to the Americans, and the biggest shock to the American system is that the people who have benefited from these things most are the elite, and they are not willing to share. And really, it's that inability to share their wealth, it's the inability for the state to tax that wealth and to bring that wealth back into circulation that actually brought the likes of Trump, and not just Trump, a huge number of other kind of right-wing populist leaders to power. So it's not just Trump; it's Orban in Hungary. It's a Freedom Party in Austria. It's the AfD in Germany. It's the National Front in France. So Trump is not an aberration. It actually fits into a series of events that have occurred in the West. Now, this is what we call the ultimate conclusion of secular liberal capitalist states, where you will have a immensely wealthy kind of elite, and the rest of society will get poorer and will sink into abject poverty. And we see that around us now, that even with this COVID kind of situation, that billionaires have added almost $1 trillion to their wealth, while the middle and the lower classes have actually seen a huge fall in their incomes. And really, in these states, it is all about money. Even when we see the COVID vaccine, I mean, it is about money. $12 vaccine for 6 billion people. It is a very hefty sum. Now, the end product of this, of what we see in this riot in America, is that what Trump has managed to do is that he has managed to erode the consensus in governance. Now, more than any laws, more than any army, more than any kind of security services, anything like that, what keeps our nation stable is that the consensus are in the way of doing things. Really, these kind of formulas, secular, liberal, capitalist, whatever, this, that, or that, is not really important. What is the most important aspect of keeping any state kind of stable is that they're the consensus. The people who are ruling and the people who are ruled, they come to a consensus of how things are done. Now, in America and these places, that the way things are done is that what they would call the rabble. The rabble choose from amongst themselves people who are slightly more sensible than themselves, and then these slightly more sensible people will go to a chamber, and that chamber will choose the ruler. And this is what the consensus that they come by. And then when the people want to change their ruler, they will have a vote, and the one who loses that vote, he will ceremonially move to one side and let the next administration in. Now, Trump has kind of eroded that consensus, and that consensus has been eroding for some time. That the view that the state should be liberal has been eroding for some time. People now they're feeling now that capitalism, secularism, and liberalism is not working for the common man, and in fact, it isn't actually working for the common man. It's working for the elite, and in reality, it was designed to work for the elite. So now that consensus in the US has been eroded. Before, it would have been unheard of that anybody would march to Capitol Hill and dispute the results of an election. Unheard of. That would never have happened, because the consensus around how power is transferred from one administration to the next administration was absolutely solid. But now that that consensus is eroding, not just in the US, but across Europe, across the West. People do not really feel anymore that these states, that this type of governance is suitable for governance anymore. It will look after their interests, and people have kind of woken up to the fact that really this formula is secular, liberal, capitalist, democratic. It is designed to look after the interests of the elite, and the elite benefit disproportionately from this formula. Now, for the Muslims, for us, there are some lessons from this. The first thing is that the West is not a role model for us at all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. Now, really, this situation is a very perverse situation, that the West, with all their ills, I mean, and when we look at their ills, it's quite obvious to see their ills. They may hide it very well. I mean, the Second World War is still within living memory. That they have put themselves forward as role models for the world, and really, from this ayah of Quran, that really it should be the Muslims who put themselves forward as role models for the world. Now, when we look at our track record, we actually had stable governance for centuries. I mean, the Abbasids were stable for 600 years. The Ottomani Khilafah was stable for about the same. Now, in 1,400 years, really, we've had three main dynasties. We've had the Umayyad, the Abbasid, and the Uthmani. And within that, we have had very stable governance. Now, these societies, for their time, they were very accountable. I mean, there is examples of many khulafa who were removed because they were not fit for purpose. They were removed by the other administrators in the state. Technologically and administratively, these are very progressive states. They weren't backward states. They were they were far more advanced technologically and mainly administratively from their Western counterparts. They were living in the Dark Ages, and the other idea is that the West is the West is built on this consensus that you rule by this formula. Now, that formula is by no means a success, and it's important that Muslims, that we in our land, that we build that consensus, an opinion that Islam and the Sharia, that this is the way forward for us, and building that consensus on this thought is probably the most important thing and most important activity that us as Muslims that we can engage in. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair.
There was a bit of delay there by the looks of it.
Yeah, no, I'm still here.
Okay.
Before we get into the question answers, brother, I've been told, can you centralize yourself a bit, if that's okay, inshallah.
Okay,
So just more a bit towards your right, the other side.
Okay.
Jazakallah khair for that. Okay, inshallah. So, Brother Muzammil, we'll start with the question answers, inshallah, yeah?
Inshallah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. The first question is from Brother Abdullah Dawood. Salam. Does the riot in America show that there is a change to come?
Yeah, I mean, what is this? Like I said before, is you right in America? As I said, the most important thing that we need to understand is that like I said, is consensus. Now, states are built on consensus. They're the general agreement about how things are done. Now, and that general agreement, it keeps a state stable. Now, once that general agreement starts to be eroded, there will be a separation. There will be factionalization in the society. You have factions forming in the society that do not agree upon how the state should be governed. Now, if you could apply that to the Muslims as well. That for 1400 years there was a general consensus about how our state should be governed. It should be going with the Sharia. Now, once that consensus had gone, the Khilafah fell. It didn't fall because of any other. It fell because that consensus had gone. There was no longer a consensus in the Ummah that this is how we're going to rule. Now, we see a similar thing in the West now with this riot. Really, in America for almost 200 years in the okay, it's been about 200 years, I think, 220 years. The U.S. state, there has been an absolute consensus that you have an election, the loser concedes, and the winner takes its place. There has been an absolute kind of consensus. Now, once that consensus is eroded, you start undermining the very basic and very kind of the justification for that state, the basis of that state. But now it is the case that election is no longer a means to transfer power. Let me find some other ways. So now you open that door to military coup. You open that door to revolution. You open that door to all kind of different kind of means of transferring power. So in that way, yeah, there has been it is a change. Now this would have been unheard of. No way would people have gone there to Capitol Hill if that consensus of governance was strong. Now what you find is that even people who are in positions of power, like senators and congressmen, they haven't really condemned that. They've almost condoned it. Yeah, Trump definitely condoned it.
Yeah.
But really, it may seem that a small thing. Only 4 people have died. I mean, it's not really an earth-shaking event. Thousands die in the US per day from gunshots, from shooting each other. But really, the main issue is that consensus has been eroded. Trump, not just Trump, the whole situation in America has eroded that consensus.
Yeah.
So yes, it is a big change.
Jazakallah khair. We'll take another question from Brother Majid Razak. So America and the West in general still seen as the yardstick for politics, governance and administration. Unfortunately, when comparing to the Muslim world, we are lagging very far behind. How do you build in the Ummah the mentality that there must be a shift from following the West?
I mean, first thing is that with the West is really when we look at capitalism, specifically, even and democracy, well, they're not really very, very good forms of governance when measured absolutely. Now, they lead to very poor decision making. They lead to, and when we look at the rest of when we look at the world as it is today, the world as it is today is quite a nasty place to live. I mean, in small, if we take the West out of it, the West is basically living off everybody else's money, to be honest. Living off, and for Nora to get her pension in Sheffield in the UK, Amina has to suffer in Pakistan or Syria or somewhere else. Really, that's the way the world is. It's an affluence in one part of the world means poverty in another part of the world. Now, that isn't really a very successful form of governance for humankind, is it? When we are proposing a system for the whole of the world, you can't really do that. You can't have one side living off the means of everybody else. So the reality is that there isn't an alternative on display. And that's really how people will make up their mind. People will only move from really en masse from one situation to another situation if the alternative is there. Now, very important now for the Muslim, as I say, is then a step to creating an alternative, which is to re-establish the Khilafah. Now, this is it's an ideological exercise. Now, as Muslim, we have to show, and even it may even what you may even deem it theoretically, but we have to show that look, we have a system of governance which is Islam. This system of governance is far superior to that system of governance which they implement today. And that is ideology. I mean, it's done via lectures, it's done via leaflets, it's done by means of mass communication, it's done by means of personally visiting people and talking to them. So it's all about communicating that what we have to offer, what Islam has to offer to the rest of the world. Now, when I say what Islam has to offer, what I mean is that Islam as an ideology. Now, when we unfortunately, these things kind of irritate me when brothers that they say all Islam has to offer is hot dinners for homeless people. I mean, that's it. That's what we have. That's what Islam has to offer. Now, the ruling system, the economic system, the whole governance system, what makes sure that there is no homeless people, that is forgotten. Now, we have got much more to offer than that. We have got much more to offer than charity. We have a whole political and economic system, social system to offer. Now, we Muslims, we should show that, yeah, this is what we have to offer. Now, the books for these are available from our website. So if you look at the Hizb ut-Tahrir website, they're there. You can look at these books. They're there to be downloaded free of charge. And you can discuss these books with our members anytime to get clarification. But the material is there, and we should show that this is what we have to offer. And it is an alternative way of life, an alternative system of governance, an alternative system of economics, an alternative social system to what they have now.
Brother Muzammil, there's a question that came to my mind. Is that okay? It's understandable that Islam is not just charity. Islam is not just your personal ibadat, how some people perceive it. But some people say that what you lot talk about is something far-fetched. Yeah, is a long term. In the meantime, I mean, nobody disagrees with that. We don't disagree with that. But in the meantime, if we can get little benefits, a bit of this, a bit of that, let's get along with that. When you get to Khilafah, we'll establish it. What do you say to those people?
Well, to be honest, those people they have their eyes half closed. To be honest, it's a very blinkered view of the world, and really is the reality of change in the world. That isn't the way it works. Reality of change, the way change occurs in the world, is that within a system of governance, within a state, pressure builds up, and the change is actually quite sudden. So the best example I have is that the Chinese Communist Party, I'm talking about in modern times, that in 1939 there were 9 people in its kind of general congress. Each Communist Party was called a congress, where all the members get together, and there were 9 people in that congress in 1939. By 1949, it was ruling the whole of China. Yeah, so change is quick. Change happens quite quickly. Now, the way change happens, and the way lasting change happens, is that lasting change happens upon the basis of a change in ideas, not anything else. A government can come, and the administration can come and go, and they may make some kind of superficial changes. They may change the facade a bit, but really, it's not lasting change. Lasting change comes when people change their ideas about how we govern, i.e., that consensus. And that consensus is only changed when there is a discussion in society about what is the best form of governance. And really, people like all the Hizb ut-Tahrir and other groups, they should engage in that discussion with people and build that consensus for the Sharia. Now, once that consensus is built, that it's basically a change waiting to happen. The change normally comes quite rapidly, and this is borne out in the whole of in whole of human history, from recent time. We look from the French Revolution till now. We've had many revolutions in many different lands, and change has been absolutely rapid in those countries. But it's all built upon a change of consensus, change of ideas. And this is my point with this, with Trump. Is that even in the West, there is a change in consensus that secular, liberal, capitalist democracy is not the best form of governance. Now, that is a change in that. Now, for all that Muslims, we should capitalize upon that questioning of this formula, especially in our own land, and say, no, actually, this is an alternative form of governance. And once we put that forward, you will see change occurs. Because change follows a change in ideas. Political change is based upon a change in in the ideas that surround governance. That's it. It's as simple as that.
Jazakallah khair. So we got another question from the case in Najib. Under secularism, we have seen a massive growth in technology and industry in a very short time. We, the Muslims, had centuries more, but never seen this kind of advancement. Some may say, does this show there is some good in the system?
So, to be honest, this is the progress in the West has actually been it's based upon something else, really. It's based upon two issues, really. What kind of spurred this growth? First thing it's based upon is that the West, it kind of ditched a theological discourse and invested, and then thought, okay, what we are going to do, what our intellectuals and our thinkers are going to do, is they are going to investigate the material world. And then built upon top of that is that around about the beginning of the 19th century, some gentlemen realized that, okay, you can make a lot of money out of this, i.e. science. Abraham Darby is up in Coalbrookdale in Staffordshire. He thought, okay, I will just investigate how I can make iron cheaper. So he did some experiments, and he came to the conclusion that, I can use coke instead of charcoal. And that was the birth of the Industrial Revolution. So really, in the West, it's been built upon an idea of an interest in the material world and the ability to make money and a capital from that interest. And that's how it kind of progressed. Now, an interest in the material world is not exclusive to any particular ideology. Anybody can have an interest in the material world. Is that now? As long as he's not discussing silly philosophical ideas. Now, the problem with the Muslims was that we were distracted with silly philosophical discussions that really we should not have been engaged in. Rather, we should have been engaged in the material world to how to better the lives and the state. And the making of the acquisition of capital is not forbidden in Islam at all. I mean, it's fine. Anybody can start a business and make whatever business they like. Islam gives that permission. Now, in various kind of Sufi ideologies, that is frowned upon. But these ideas are actually quite alien to Islam. Uthman bin Affan and Abdul Rahman bin Auf were actually very wealthy people, and these are people who were of the Ashram al-Bashireen. So the poverty is not something which is prescribed upon us. It's not necessary that Ummah has to be poor to get to Jannah. So really, these ideas, they are not exclusive to any particular system of governance, any particular. Islam can accommodate these ideas, no problem. So it was actually a misunderstanding of Islam that led to the decline of Islam rather than an understanding of Islam. Now, when we look at the West, really, it's the purer that you implement that ideology, the worse and nasty people's lives are. So we look at Britain. When you leave, in the Victorian age, we had was neoliberal capitalism. Everything was left to the market, and we had a very nasty society. It was a very nasty society. I mean, Charles Dickens kind of sums it up, doesn't it? They were basically selling their granny to the soap factories. That's literally what they were doing. So when we look at that, when we look at the situation of the Muslims, to summarize this point, it was actually a misunderstanding of Islam which led to our decline. But with the West, it's actually a pure understanding of their ideology and pure implementation of their ideology, which leads to a very nasty situation for their people. Here, that is the main difference. I mean, like I said, is these ideas are not exclusive to any particular ideology, any particular belief system. Anybody could progress, and we have seen that we've seen that bear fruit. I mean, I think the best example I can give you is Japan under the kind of the previous emperors. In the 1850s, they were in the Stone Age virtually. But by the very beginning of the 20th century, they had defeated the Russian Navy. Progress was that rapid, and they were not Western in any way. They still maintained their Shinto beliefs. So, like I said, progress is not linked to any particular ideology. Progress is to do with governance and good governance. The better your governance, the more you will progress as a nation. Whatever ideology you implement.
Right. Basically, as some people say, it's not the question of that. We need education first.
No,
we need
not at all.
to have certain institutions that educate our youth, and then.
To be honest, bro, is when people say this, they're just talking. It's just nonsense. The reason why it's so much nonsense is even a very cursory search on Google will show you that there is a huge number of PhD graduates in Pakistan across the Muslim world unemployed, without employment whatsoever. Now you find people working in petrol stations in Egypt with PhDs.
Yeah.
So if it was education, if it was, and in fact, to be honest, is when you look around you here in the West, especially those of us working in the health sector, the NHS benefits from the education systems of other nations. The nurses, the doctors, and so on and so forth are from abroad. Those nations have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars educating these people, and these people are benefiting from those people, from their education system. So really, it's not about education, it's about governance. It's about establishing governance and what you govern by.
Inshallah. We'll take one more question from Brother Nashad Naeem. Would it be fair to say the only barrier for change in the Muslim world are the tyrant rulers who have been imposed upon us?
I would disagree with that. I would agree and disagree with that. From the point that I would agree is that look, okay, yeah, these tyrant rulers are a considerable obstacle in change. But then really it is all the other ummah, not just we have groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir who are on this, who talk about political change, but really it's few and far between. Really this call for political change and it should be widespread across the ummah. There should be a consensus upon what that change should be. And when we look at the Arab Spring, the main failure and one of the biggest failings of the Arab Spring was that none of these nations, none of the movements in these nations build a consensus upon what that change should be. Now, if it's for the Ummah and people like groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir and other groups that we build this consensus that the change it should be from a secular state to an Islamic state, khilafah. Now, it is the absence of that consensus which actually is the biggest kind of barrier to change. Now, once that consensus is built, the elites are nothing. They're just brushed aside like dust off a mushaf.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Don't see any more questions. Well, we'll take one more. Well, a question from Brother Nabil Arshad. And he's asking, will Trump ever return as he seems popular?
Trump is popular with a select group of people, but really, what it was Trump is this. Trump came to power on the basis of two issues: globalization and three issues: globalization, immigration, and automation. Really, the American public as a whole, they felt very threatened by the way the world was going. Now, the way the world was going was actually in the interests of the elite of the US. What they could do, what they have done is that they have moved their manufacturing jobs from the US, paying $20 an hour, to China, paying less than $1 an hour, made the products in China, and imported their products back to the US and sold them for very much the same price. Okay, for the American state, it's been for the governments of America, it had a certain benefit in that it has stored inflation. Really, if you were paying £20 an hour to somebody to sell you jeans, those jeans would be $200, even from Primark, because the number of man hours that have gone into producing that. So really, the government have allowed this, state allowed this for inflationary purposes, to store inflation. But what has ended up happening is that you have a huge number of very impoverished workers in China, in India, and in the third world, and you have a huge number of impoverished consumers in the West. And ended up happening is that the Western consumers are borrowing money from the Eastern producers to buy their products. This is the way the world is. It's a very upside down kind of situation at the moment. Now, in that, the public on both sides, the general public on both sides, is actually it's in a much worse position, because you have impoverished workers and impoverished consumers. Now, obviously, that's going to have a reaction. Trump was the man who promised that to stop all this automation, stop all this kind of this leakage of jobs to abroad. But he annulled certain kind of, like the NAFTA agreement with North America. He got the US out of these kind of free trade kind of agreements. He tried to make it. He tried to kind of have a much more of a kind of a nationalist kind of policies. But really, that was not in the interest of the elite, and the elite wanted him out, and the elite got him out.
Yeah. Okay, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah, it's been a fantastic topic to discuss. Just before we leave, inshallah, if you could just sort of wrap this whole discussion like 2 minutes, just to sort of a home-taking message, what would you say?
I mean, the home-taking message is this, is that liberal, capitalist, secular democracy does not work. It's been shown not to work, and it is about time that Muslims that we present the reality of what Islam actually is to the rest of the world, and to show that this is the alternative. Because people will only change when they see a working alternative, or when they when they feel that there's an alternative that will work. Either they feel that there is a working alternative, or they feel that this alternative can work. Now, it's about time Muslims that we offer to the rest of the world what Islam really is. An ideology which has its political, its social, economic, and every other system that human beings need to live. And we showed it in that manner. I mean, soup kitchens for the homeless are not the only thing that Islam has to offer. I mean, I keep saying that point, but Islam has much more to offer than that. So that would be my take-home message.
Khair, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Brother Muzammil, for today's discussion. Brothers and sisters, we shall take your leave today until next week, inshallah. Please, again, do remember to share the Facebook and YouTube page with your friends and families, and please have an eye out to have a look at the next week's Friday Circle, inshallah. With that in mind, inshallah, please stay safe, and we'll see you next week, inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Podcasts on current events, Islamic guidance, Quran tafsir, and seerah are available at islampodcasts.com, as well as on iTunes. Rate, review, and comment, and let us know how we can grow in our knowledge to better serve our community. Please subscribe, share, and tell a friend about islampodcasts.com.